Then let me introduce the next panel, which is moderated by George Zimis from GJT Marine Consultants. It's about cybersecurity in the maritime industry.
If not, that's okay.
No. Just let me get
A handwritten one for me?
Yes.
Let me check my phone. I am speaking.
There you are then. Yes, there you go.
Sure said.
We can share us.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Sorry about the logistical snafu. We're short one name card. Ian Branson, sitting next to me, should have his card here, ABS Group, but I'll introduce everybody in a second. Let me first start off with, I was thinking when you get to these years that start off with really round, even numbers like 2020, it makes you think of elections, it makes you think of the Olympics. And in my twisted mindset as a maritime lawyer, you go back 30 years and it harkens probably the most revolutionary piece of legislation that's changed the way we approach marine risks. And that was, well, can anybody guess what happened 30 years ago? For our Greek friends, OPA, Oil Pollution Act of 1990, was enacted following the Exxon Valdez case. And how much has happened ever since? I mean, so much has happened since then. It started out with blue cards, which revolutionized P&I as well. And when I started out at P&I Club, it was maybe 2 blue cards and COFRs. But then now we have blue cards for so many other things. There's a lot more regulation. You've got Athens Protocol, we have Bunker Convention, we have Nairobi Convention, all of these different regimes. So I guess it's inevitable that with the growing trend of digitalization of shipping, that the regulations would eventually delve into this realm. So the Coast Guard last year in July, following a cyber incident in this very port, the port of New York and New Jersey, they had stated, and I'm quoting them, with engines that are controlled by mouse clicks and growing reliance on electronic charting and navigation systems, protecting these systems with proper cybersecurity measures is as essential as controlling physical access to the ship or performing routine maintenance on traditional machinery. A new world order, in essence. Going back a couple of years before that, the IMO adopted a resolution that encouraged the shipping industry to address cyber risks within its safety management systems, and to do so by January 1, 2021. So no sooner than we had Sulfur Cap 2020, there's a new due date for more compliance less than a year from now. So what are we going to discuss with this panel? We're going to start off by discussing what we anticipate these new impending requirements to ask of the shipping community. We're then going to explore how a vessel owner will endeavor to comply with these requirements, and then we'll get into what incidents and threats are out there and what the industry has experienced in the past year. So with that, with this backdrop, I'm going to introduce our panel members. We have Ian Branson. Oh, you do have a card. There we go. It magically appeared. Who is the head of global cybersecurity at the ABS Group. We have Lieutenant Commander Sarah Brennan, Deputy Safety and Security Operations, U.S. Coast Guard Sector, New York. We're very honored to have you, Lieutenant Commander. We have Chris Klott, ABS Chair of Marine Transportation and Logistics in the Global Business and Transportation Department, SUNY Maritime. Cynthia Hudson, CEO of Hudson Analytics. And William Nugent, Vice President, Head of Ship Operations, International Seaways. So, I feel, for those of you who know me, I quote a lot of movies, and everyone's quoted movies so far. I don't know where I'm going to try and squeeze them in, so let's see how creative I can get during the program. I think for the first question, I'd like to ask Chris. Mm-hmm. Can you explain for us now what these impending IMO SMS requirements vis-a-vis cyber really are, and if you can try and summarize that for us?
I'm going to try to squeeze this in quick. Because,
we could have a whole conference on that issue.
Because we got a lot of good information ahead. Okay, so as George had mentioned, as of January 2021, a cyber risk management SMS program, document of compliance, needs to be put into place. And this would include all commercially operated vessels over 500 gross tons. Companies operating approved safety management systems are required to take into account cyber risk management in accordance with the objectives and functional requirements of the International Safety Management Code. Basically, in practice, this means that the company has to risk assess their IT systems, including system to operate the vessel, and issue procedures to manage cybersecurity risks. What do these include? These are all industry best practices, of course, regarding bridge systems, cargo handling and management, propulsion and machinery management, access control systems, administrative and crew welfare systems, communication systems. And if there are changes that need to be done to operational systems or new IT hardware required, this needs to be done for companies to be compliant. This is supposed to be a dynamic process. That means assessing current cyber from external sources and implementing standards to ensure that safety, operability, performance, and security are kept to some desired level during the service life of the vessel. This, by the way, includes port authority, shipbuilders, ship owners, operators, managers, everybody working together in a holistic manner. Obviously, this is going to mean increased education and training for all personnel in organizations, ship, shore, third parties, cloud services, everything to enable cyber-resilient ships that can be maintained in service. Failure to address these risks could lead to serious injury, fatality, disruption, damage, loss of use, impact upon business operations, reputational damage, loss of revenue, financial penalties, litigation. Obviously, there are going to be big enforcement questions there. I'm going to let Cynthia carry on from here.
By all means, Cynthia, if you'd like to just, well, actually, the question I wanted to ask one quick follow-up, Chris, which is, so there isn't a one-size-fits-all.
No. In fact, I just got my feed today. Some of you might get the same things. The Pentagon has just issued a, oh, good Lord, they call it the CMMC, Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. And they specifically say this is a start. Cybersecurity is not a one-size-fits-all, and nor is that the case in point here.
And just one other quick follow-up. In terms of who determines the sufficiency of the SMS plan and the cyber dimension, how is that left to flag state? Is that left to port state? How does that work?
As I know it, and
how is it going to work?
I stand to be corrected. I believe that's port state.
Okay. Well, perhaps we'll have.
Feel free to correct me.
Lieutenant Commander Brennan comment on that in a bit. But before we get to Lieutenant Commander Brennan, Cynthia, I wanted to ask you, bearing in mind what Chris has just summarized for us, what would be the basic approach for such a cyber risk management or for compliance by a shipping company to try and meet its obligations to prepare a sufficient SMS plan with this dimension?
Thank you for asking. I think that most people would answer that question by rushing into an assessment on a vessel. We agree that that's absolutely necessary. However, we believe that this is an issue that really begins in the C-suite. It begins at the very top of the organization. This is an issue that affects the balance sheet. It cannot be relegated to even the best IT department or IT manager. It is a business issue with a balance sheet implication. And so because of that, we believe that the place to start is there with education, there meaning the C-suite, with education to begin with. And part of that education is understanding the specific threats that may exist for the business and the types of equipment and types of trade in which you're operating theater. What is your theater of operation, and what does it mean to really make a plan for cybersecurity? When you've begun that educational process, you're really ready for assessment. But again, we would caution that the assessment really needs to start at the enterprise level. In other words, where are the ports of entry for cyber problems? And believe me, they are not only on the vessels, although the ISM code obviously is pushing us toward vessel management and should do. But that starts back in the office before we deliver it out to each vessel. That's going to require a culture change mostly, because just like everything else we do, we tend to stovepipe and we tend to give it, my famous thing is, give it to the DPA. The DPA does everything, and usually the windows as well. Give it to the DPA. We're asking to try to step back a little bit and make this everyone's responsibility to the appropriate degree, with leadership in charge. Then there's going to be a need for some technology. We suggest that technology can be helpful in assessing as well as benchmarking. In other words, how do you know you've done well? Well, you don't really unless you've measured it, and you can't measure it unless you've got a mechanism for doing so. Then go get the advice you need, and usually this is not a one-size-fits-all, as you mentioned, so the advice that you need is going to be really fairly holistic in size and shape, and can run from the well-known and well-loved penetration test all the way up to business continuity advice and incorporation of cyber in that. Then the training, the response setup, and the right sorts of planning. Some people have reversed the order of those things, but essentially that's how we look at it.
Thank you, Cynthia. And you mentioned some words that seem to be very recurring in the compliance standpoint. We were talking earlier today with the OFAC sanctions panel, and with the sanctions compliance guidance that OFAC has given. A lot of it sounds very similar in terms of there has to be ownership by the company of addressing these issues. There has to be a corporate philosophy change, and education and training being all part of that. And then we get to tie that in with the Coast Guard's comments that, you know, what's it, transparency, making an effort, and I forget the third one. There was a third one. I wish Captain Tama were here.
Due diligence.
Yeah, okay, so we're seeing a similar approach on the cyber security side.
Absolutely. It seems to work. If top management takes ownership, we see this from Open 90 with the COFR certificates, for example, and the need to appoint directly a qualified individual, and the need to be responsible for the actual response. There's a recognition throughout, whether you're looking at OCIMF's TMSA program, or you're looking at other aspects like OFAC, or you're looking at an environmental compliance program, enforcement action. There's a recognition that the culture in the company has to take ownership for this. Yeah.
Thank you, Cynthia. I'd like to turn to Bill Nugent now and ask him, as a vessel operator and a manager, what's your perspective here, and what have you actually experienced in seeing this obligation coming down the pike and your preparations for complying with these obligations?
Well, you know, we're 4.5 weeks past January 1, so I was looking for a new project. This is great. Something new to tackle. You know, unfortunately, Cynthia, I'm going to echo a lot of what you've said. This is a board-level conversation that we have at Seaways. We look at the ships as really remote offices. So the procedures, processes, practices that we have in the office, all the testing, the training, the analysis, the risk assessments flow right through to the vessels, and we look at them the same way. And we're fortunate to have and challenged by our customers, the oil majors. You know, they outsource their risk to us and ask us to come to their terminals and carry their cargoes. So they're looking through the SIRE program, through the TMSA program for more, right? So we have to be able to demonstrate to them that we are cyber safe and cyber secure. So, you know, from that perspective, I'm not particularly concerned about the ISM implementation. I think we're in good shape for that, but it has taken a lot of work. It has involved hardware changes. It has involved, you know, onboard assessments. It has involved penetration testing, a lot of training, you know, all of those little, you know, 15-minute micro-learning things that we all have to do in the office about passwords. Well, the crews get them too. My own experience, you know, we go on board the ships, and the first thing I do when I'm sitting in the captain and the chief engineer's cabin is pick up their keyboard and see if the Post-it note is there with the welcome one password. I don't find that anymore, right? So some of these things are working. But, you know, again, it has taken that level of focus from the very, very top down to the deck plates to make that as effective as it is today. And we're not done yet. I mean, we're never, ever, ever done.
Well, I think I've changed my Amazon Prime password 6 times in the past year, so probably not the best person to ask about something like that. Tell me, in terms of your preparedness or your efforts, have you added staff? Have you hired additional people to focus solely on this, or is it outside consultants?
You need experts, right? And it's more than just can I say, simply outsourcing, right? You're dealing with an ever-evolving series of threats that are coming from, you know, completely different directions, new vectors, new attacks, and you know, when you try to take that, if you just try to take it on yourself, you really, really struggle. You need expertise that can aggregate, and the AI is a good example because we're doing some proof of concept with AI on board, same as we have AI for cyber protection in the office. You need more than just what you can hire in, unless you're a really, really big organization. So, yes, we haven't added a full-time employee, but we have outsourced and are managing that both on land and at sea.
Okay, thank you, Bill. Ian, I'm going to turn to you now. From your perspective, again now, do you see a vessel owner's compliance with these SMS cyber obligations? Do you see compliance being the end of the story, or is there a difference between compliance and being what you might term being cyber secure?
Yeah, I think the IMO push right here and the guidance is just a first set of a sea change, if you will. With a lot more connectivity coming in, digitalization, we just heard all about the AI and everything else, that all that connectivity is not going away, it's becoming more. And usually that means that there's going to be sets of factors and drivers. One of those is, of course, compliance and government piece. Those tend to be a little bit slower. They tend to be usually high level, or what we call compliance driven, meaning yes, no, versus maturity driven, which is you're trying to figure out how well you do something. And as you pointed out, there's a difference between being compliant and being secure. So as this goes in, I think this is just a signal in here with the IMO that it's the first element in. But as you see, it's going to become a market advantage, competitive advantage. It's going to be something that charters are going to look at, or insurers are going to look at in a way, in a very serious manner, about how they evaluate it. So it becomes a business imperative. All this comes down to is cyber risk management or risk management. And how do you do that if if technology and utilization is a market reality, then cybersecurity is a market imperative.
And generally speaking, what kind of threats and potential attacks are out there? And that's a pretty broad question, but if you could try and just boil it down even.
Well, I mean, that's always obviously a hard question to ask because they're going to be ever evolving. But what you have here is a new space, right? Bad guys are trying to figure out how to get into it. Good guys are trying to figure out how to defend it. People are trying to figure out how to buy it or how to sell it or how to implement it. It's the Wild West out there with all this. It's a primordial soup, if you will, of all this coming together. And so if you look at the kinds of attacks that are happening, you can see them adapting quite quickly. So the threats that are out there, whether they be nation states, whether they be hacktivists or terrorists or organized crime, they're all putting a lot of resources into this. They all have different motivations, but they're all very well trained. Okay, they're all have high motivation, right? And they're all very, very patient. So they realize that having in shipping, you can have kinetic effects. I can run a ship into another ship. I can open a valve. I can stop or I can manipulate energy markets by slowing one provider down and not slowing the other. There's lots of implications of what they have. But what you see is that they are adapting a lot faster than we're evolving. And that's when you get in that risk gap. And so the types of attacks we used to see just the ransomware on the IT systems, which is the Maersk one that people see and always refer to, even that ransomware has adapted many times over. You're seeing things like GPS, which has been around for a while, GPS spoofing, but then you're going to start seeing ones getting into safety management, safety systems. You're going to see ones getting deeper into the navigation. You're going to see these things getting deeper in because they're learning faster than we're figuring out how to stop them.
Thank you for that, Ian. We'll get to spoofing in a bit, but what I wanted to turn to now is the enforcement side. And we're fortunate to have with us today Lieutenant Commander Sarah Brennan. Lieutenant Commander, the Coast Guard, as we all know, is tasked with enforcing many regulatory regimes on top of your search and rescue tasks and assistance. SMS compliance, port state control inspections, environmental, regulatory compliance, all of these tasks. But from an enforcement standpoint, how do you see the new SMS cyber requirements change the way you approach your day-to-day, or will it make your job easier, or do you see it making it harder? What are your initial impressions?
I think when they add cyber into SMS, you can expect that we will enforce it the same way we would any other violation, or I shouldn't say violation, but deficiency in an SMS, right? So we're not going to all of a sudden come out storming onto the vessel asking to see your cyber in your SMS. But if there is an issue and we're digging deeper into a specific deficiency that we find, we always go back to the SMS. And I think that's what you guys are seeing out there on your vessels now. If there is, oil underneath the engine and it's pulling up, we're going to ask why. And then if we find out it's because this piston's been whatever for this long, well, what does your SMS say about that particular machinery? And are you not following it? So you can imagine that with cyber, it would be the same way. If you're having a specific issue with your networks on board and it's causing an issue that causes us to look deeper or expand our exam, we will certainly be going into the SMS and then requesting that audit if that's where the deficiency fell. So I think for us, I think it's, probably the same. We'll add to our exams, perhaps, just depending on if we find cause to look farther into that particular portion of the SMS. But it should be, fairly simple, I would think. It's going to be a matter of, just like everybody else, we're going to have to bring some more training into our programs and just awareness on how we manage it and look at it, too.
Okay, and I appreciate I'm asking you a perspective question because you've never really had to go out and enforce this specific requirement. But that being said, perhaps you could explain for us right now in what you've done in the past year or so, including in the context of the incident that took place in February 2019, how you approach cyber-related incidents in the shipping community within your district, or within,
Right.
or around the country if you're aware of other incidents within the Coast Guard and it gets,
Right.
information gets disseminated internally.
So I am fortunate to work for somebody like Captain Tama, who is very, he definitely pushes the boundary in cyber, and we have all the authorities we need to at a minimum challenge a vessel that's having an issue that's been reported to us. Now the cyber safety alert that you referenced was a U.S. deep draft vessel inbound to the port of New York and New Jersey who reported to us through the NRC that they were having a network issue on board. Now, just like Captain Thomas said, and I hope that you're experiencing this across the nation in your different ports, but transparency and full disclosure to us gets you everywhere. You know, we want to work with you. It's always our goal to facilitate commerce and keep you moving and keep you on time and on target with everything you're trying to do. So with that particular vessel, they reported on NRC, through the NRC, so we were able to pull a team together fairly quickly. We called our cyber protection team up from Washington, D.C. They came in that afternoon, and we were ready to go by the following morning to respond. We also brought an FBI agent along with us who's from the Cyber Task Force here in New York City, and he that was arranged with the company as well. So that was all. We had, the company knew fully who we were bringing on board, what our plan was, and what exactly we had hoped to do. So what's interesting about that case is that they did in fact already have cyber procedures in their SMS, and we did check that. There was no, violation when it came down to it. And I think, we've talked a lot about, and it's fun to talk sometimes about doomsday scenarios with, oh, we're going to navigate the vessel into a bridge and we're going to take out the economy of all of New York. What you need to be worried about is those very simple things. I mean, in that particular case, that was a security team who had been on board to escort the vessel through a troubled area, which you are all very familiar with. You hire these teams all the time for your vessels. It was a banking malware, ransomware. Emotet was the name of the virus, and it was from a security personnel on board who had logged on to their crew's computer that sat in the crew's mess with no password and checked their banking account. When they checked their bank account, something happened at that point. The next day they were missing, $4,000 or whatever it was. Now that particular virus, because there was no segmentation or segregation in the network on board, it was a completely flat network. That virus was able to infect and reinfect computers. So from shore, this company was loading antivirus and trying to remotely fix this problem on the vessel, and they would clean up one computer and it would travel back and reinfect that same. So like I said, with our FBI agent who was on board, who was able to do a lot of the forensics and turned that around in 3 or 4 days, was able to say it was Emotet and it was not a targeted thing. Like, that's what we all need to understand. It wasn't about the ship and confusing data and moving cargo where they wanted it to go. It was a very simple, they didn't care who they were getting in, whose bank they were getting into, but it completely took that network down.
Okay, well, thank you for that, Lieutenant Commander. Now that was an example of a deep draft commercial vessel having a cyber incident. Were there any shoreside experiences that the Coast Guard
We have
saw
had
in the last year?
I'm sure everybody remembers NotPetya. That happened with Maersk APM. That everybody knows that example. So that was my first summer here, I think 17, when that happened. But this past year in November, just this past November, there was an MTSA regulated facility out west that was taken down for about 30 hours because of Ryuk, R-Y-U-K. That's the virus that infected their system. And again, it was another flat network that wasn't necessarily targeted at that facility, but they were able to infiltrate the business systems on that network and then travel through the network, because it was also flat and unsegmented, into some of their industry control systems, some of their monitoring equipment, and how they were able to see where cargo was in and out. So they actually had to take down their entire network. Now, what's interesting about that case is it was 30 hours total, but they had planned a system upgrade and had a bunch of hardware on site ready to go. If they had not had all that hardware on site, it would have been a much different story. But because it took down their industrial control systems and some of the equipment they were using to regulate security in accordance with their MTSA facility security plan, that was our sort of grip in there. So that's why they had to report it.
And after you experienced this February 2019 incident, the Coast Guard issued on July 8th, 2019, a safety alert, which essentially gave recommendations to the industry as to how to improve its cybersecurity and gave guidance. With that, I'd like to kind of springboard a little bit to another issue, and we're running out of time too. I don't want to spend too much time in taking away time from other panels. And this is really for, I guess it's for Ian and Bill right now. And Ian, we'll start off with you. From a shipyard standpoint, and both from vessel construction and design, is there anything you can add to kind of enlighten all of us as to what's being done from that perspective that would not only just help compliance with these obligations, but just overall to improve cybersecurity and cyber safety in the industry?
As this all starts evolving, as there are more incidents that's happening, as IMO comes in, there's going to be more market pressure to do stuff. That goes through the whole value chain. That means from owners, then that goes back to shipyards, and shipyards to OEMs and design. So there's a concept called security by design, which means basically when you're developing and designing the vessel, the segmentation that you talked about needs to be thought about, right? The idea of understanding that this vessel is going to be used by people, so insider threat, and people who are actually going to be sticking in all their USB ports or whatever they're going to do and checking their bank accounts is going to happen, right? You're not going to stop that human factor. You got to build that into the design part of this at the beginning, because if you bolt on cybersecurity at the end, it's not going to be nearly as secure. And it's when the owners start saying, hey, I need that, and that's going to be a competitive advantage all the way to the shipyards, and then the shipyards are going to have to take ownership of that. It becomes then again part of how you design and develop a piece. And then also the secure design itself. So the security by design is how I design it, and then secure design is or a secure build is when I'm building it, I'm not actually introducing more vulnerabilities and issues, and I'm controlling the third parties that are coming on here, and I understand what's coming into my supply chain. So that whole part of the value chain needs to come together, because if all the pieces together, that's where the attackers come in.
Bill, anything to add from your experiences?
Well, yeah, I can echo what Ian's saying, and you know we're installing some large bits of kit in China at the moment, which can be connected to the suppliers' computer networks if we choose to let them. And part of that design review in that process was, just as Ian said, looking at the initial design of the system. Is it safe? How will it fit into our existing operational networks? You know, what are the interactions there? What new risks are we introducing? Do we want to connect it because we don't have to? And then what access will we provide? So it becomes then, you know, it's a key piece of scrubbers are a key piece of our compliance strategy. So how do we then make sure that it fits all of our compliance regimes? So it's part of our DNA. Okay.
Thank you, Bill. I wanted to talk about one other incident that took place within the past year since we had our last conference last February. And as we all know, those of us keeping track on the industry news, in July, a British flag tanker, the Stena Impero, was seized by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard while transiting the Strait of Hormuz. And there had been reports that the vessel had been spoofed by Iranian interests, where the vessel's navigation had been compromised, its GPS was interfered with, and it sailed off course, and it essentially created an opportunity and pretense for the Iranian military to board the vessel closer to its territorial waters. This was if you want to call it a classic cyber attack, but by a state actor, as opposed to the one that you experienced, Lieutenant Commander Brennan. And I think it's a good segue to our next panel, which gets into political turmoil, because this was a part of the world where we almost just had a war erupt not too long ago. And the Strait of Hormuz sees 20 million barrels of crude oil and petroleum products pass through it every day. So this was obviously a significant incident. Now, bearing that in mind, and this is for Lieutenant Commander Brendan, Chris, and Cynthia, and I think we have to end with this because we're running out of time. Can you all briefly just maybe give us a quick response as to how you feel we might be able to harden these types of operations on board the vessel, meaning either the GPS or bridge operation? Is there any, again, I'm sure that this is a loaded question that we can't answer in 2 minutes, but if you have just some general impressions.
Sorry, can I just say one, just quick? This is the one that keeps me awake. So, yes.
So we had a hackathon back in March. Sarah was kind enough to be present at that, and we asked this very question to innovators. How can we come up with something? I think this is an area that is ripe for innovation. Because as of right now, my answer would be simply good cyber hygiene, and borrowing on what Ian has said about system by design. Cynthia.
Well, prior to this incident, for about 2 months, the GPS signals had been being jammed sporadically by the Iranians. In other words, there was an opportunity to read tea leaves. But you have to be able to get that information in order to make yourself better prepared. If you were better prepared in this particular incident, I mean, could you use standard navigational practices if you were prepared? Could you have been running an alternate system on board? Well, if you knew that there were issues in the area, and keep in mind, Iran promised to do this. So before that 2-month jamming program, we've known that Iran was intending to disrupt oil tankers in that area for years, since the United States disrupted the nuclear arrangement. So what we're saying is that this really points not so much to a quick fix on the GPS spoofing, which is going to continue and is a big problem, but it really points to being very much situationally aware about the threats that are facing your company, your vessels, your trade, your trading patterns, just as we've already adopted, for example, in the anti-piracy world. We have to do something but a bit more on the cyber side.
Thank you, Cynthia.
Yeah, I would echo what both of these fine people have said. It's not, I couldn't recommend to you a specific product that does whatever, but I think it just points to the fact that based on all these events, I mean, we know that kind of activity is happening, and that's not the only place in the world that it is. But just that this is that important and you should care, and I believe also that it needs to start at the top. So.
Thank you, Lieutenant Commander. Well, I think that we're out of time, but maybe one question from the audience, if anyone has one.
Cyber's so cool. Come on.
We answered everything.
I'm hacking all of you.
Oh, wait, we have some questions.
At least a Matrix
There are
reference or something.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't make one. I didn't make any movie reference.
Is the West, whatever that means, ahead in the cyber race, or are the Chinese or the Russians or Ukrainians beating us at this game?
Can I answer that?
Yeah, I don't know.
Any country who is trying to follow the rules is probably lagging. So to the extent that there are groups or nation states that are willing to play by those, not what we would consider the rules, we might be a little behind. Now, do we have the technology and knowledge of how to do things? Yes, we do. And perhaps you could point to the ISIRL incident that seemed to be a nation-state attack on Iran. I'm not qualified to say if it was the U.S. who prompted that some years ago. But so we have the technology, but generally we're trying to play by the rules. I hope that answered your question.
Okay, I'm not going to make a movie reference here. I think we're running out of time, but my quote is going to be, all I ask is a tall ship and a star to steer her by. And that now is changing to I guess all I ask is an automated vessel that has appropriate SMS, that's cyber secure, and nobody's around to spoof me. So times have changed. And I'd like to thank everyone here on the panel for their participation and insight. And we have to make way for the next panel. So thank you very much, everyone.